The night in Milan was cold and quiet, but inside the private meeting room on the 42nd floor of the Principe di Savoia Hotel, the air was thick with tension. Crystal chandeliers threw soft golden light across a long mahogany table where 6 of the most dangerous men in Europe sat facing each other. 5 were Russian. The 6th was Italian. Alessandro Moretti was 38 years old, the youngest man ever to inherit the leadership of the Moretti crime family. He wore a charcoal suit tailored in Naples and the calm expression of a man who had learned long ago that emotion was a luxury he could not afford. On the table sat a leather folder containing the terms of a €200 million arms contract, a deal that had taken 8 months. The other one, the small black device tucked deep inside the inner pocket of his vest, the one whose number only 3 people in the world knew. His mother, who had been dead for 4 years, his younger sister in New York, and one other. Alessandro drew the phone out and raised a single finger. "Forgive me, I must take this." Viktor Volkov, the head of the Russian delegation, tightened his mouth. In this world, interrupting a negotiation of this size was an insult that could end in blood. Alessandro was already lifting the phone to his ear. "Who is this?" he said quietly. A pause, then a voice so small he thought he had misheard. "Uncle, my mama didn't take the bracelet." Alessandro went completely still. The glass in his other hand tilted, and dark red wine spilled across the white linen in a slow, spreading stain. He did not see it. "Emma," he whispered, "where are you? Speak slowly for me." 6 months earlier, on a rare Saturday morning at the Moretti estate in Sicily, Alessandro had come downstairs and found a 4-year-old girl sitting cross-legged on the marble floor of his study. She had built a small tower out of empty brass shell casings he had carelessly left behind. He had watched her for almost a full minute before she noticed him. "Mr. Alessandro," she had said, holding up her creation. "I built a castle." He did not remember the last time anyone had made him smile in the morning. He knelt in front of her and slid the small silver ring from his little finger, the ring shaped like a wolf's head that was the private mark of the Moretti bloodline. He took a pen from his pocket and scratched a series of numbers into the soft inner curve of the band. "Emma," he said gently, closing her tiny fingers around it, "if your tower ever falls down, you call this number, and I will come." Now, in a hotel room in Milan, that same small voice was speaking into his ear. The tower had fallen down. Her mama had been thrown out of the house. Her mama was crying in the bathroom. Uncle Marco had said her mama was a thief. Alessandro closed his eyes for a single heartbeat. Have you ever imagined that a phone call from a 4-year-old child could bring an entire empire of betrayal crashing down in a single night? He opened his eyes and looked across the mahogany at Viktor Volkov. "Gentlemen, this meeting is over. I have to go home." Viktor half rose from his chair. "Signor Moretti, you cannot possibly." "I can," Alessandro said, reaching for his coat. The €200 million folder lay untouched on the table, and he did not look at it. "And I am somewhere far to the south, in a cheap motel outside Palermo." A small girl still held the phone against her ear, waiting for the man she had called uncle to come and fix what the grown-ups had broken. To understand how a 4-year-old girl had ended up in a roadside motel at and about 1,000 kilometers south, to the place where all of this had begun. The Moretti estate sat on a hill above the coast of Sicily, half castle and half fortress, built of pale cream marble that turned rose-colored at sunset. An iron gate 5 meters high guarded the only road in. Behind that gate, past a driveway lined with cypress trees, stood a house of 40 rooms, 3 courtyards, a chapel, and a wine cellar older than most European monarchies. It was the seat of the Moretti bloodline, and for the last decade it had belonged to Alessandro. Sophia Ricci had first walked through that gate 7 years ago. She was 25 then. She was a widow. Her husband had died on the coast road outside Messina when a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel, and she had buried him with a baby still in her arms, a little girl named Emma, who had not yet learned to say her father's name. She had come to the estate with a single suitcase, a folded reference letter, and the last €100 in her wallet. Donatella Moretti, Alessandro's mother, had interviewed her herself. The old signora had been dying then, though only she and her son knew it. She had taken one look at the young widow standing in the doorway with a sleeping infant against her shoulder, and she had hired her that same afternoon. 2 weeks before her death, Donatella had called Alessandro to her bedside and taken his hand. "That girl," she had said, "the one with the baby. She is a decent person, Alessandro. Take care of her when I am gone," he had promised. He had kept the promise, though not in any way his mother might have imagined. Sophia rose. From part-time housekeeper to full-time staff to head of the private wing, the section of the house that contained Alessandro's study, his private files, and the family safe. She was the only person besides him who knew the combination to that safe. In 7 years, she had never once opened it. She had never once been tempted. Emma grew up inside those walls. She learned to walk on the marble of the East Corridor. She learned her numbers on the buttons of the microwave. The bodyguards, hard men who had killed for the family, softened whenever she toddled past them, and one by one they became her uncles. The staff called her the little principessa of the villa, and no one who worked in the house spoke the name without smiling. Alessandro was rarely home. When he was, something in the air of the private wing changed, and Sophia felt it before she ever saw him. He would leave small things for Emma, a stuffed bear from Vienna, a set of colored pencils from Paris. He would offer them awkwardly, as if handing them to Sophia rather than the child, and Sophia would take them with lowered eyes and quiet thanks. Their eyes met sometimes, in doorways, in hallways, over a cup of coffee on a quiet morning, and then one of them always looked away. 7 years. Neither had ever said a word. On Tuesday morning, at 6 o'clock, Alessandro's car pulled up at the front steps to take him to the airfield and the plane to Milan. Marco Bianchi, the head steward of the house, stood waiting with his hands folded behind his back. He was 45, gray at the temples, wearing the neat black suit he had worn every day for 20 years. He had served Alessandro's father before him. He had held Alessandro in his arms the day of his baptism. Alessandro paused at the car door and turned back. "Marco," he said, "watch over everything while I am away. Sophia is in charge of the private wing. Do not disturb her." Marco bowed his head. "Of course, Signor Moretti." Alessandro got into the car. As it pulled away down the cypress drive, Marco raised his eyes to the departing taillights, and something passed across his face that no one in the house was there to see. The look on Marco Bianchi's face, the one no one had been there to see, had been building for almost a year. To the household he was still the same man, neatly dressed, unhurried, courteous to the newest maid and the oldest capo alike. He had served the Moretti family for more than 20 years. He had been the personal bodyguard to Alessandro's father before old age moved him indoors. He had held the infant Alessandro at his baptism. Everyone in the villa took his word as they took the sunrise. They did not know about Napoli. They did not know about the small back rooms where he had spent his nights off, feeding chips into a table until the pile disappeared. They did not know that he owed 3 million euros to men who did not accept excuses. They did not know his wife had left him 18 months ago, or that his 12-year-old daughter Chiara lay in a Naples hospital with a failing heart and a surgeon who had told him gently that without 500,000 euros for the operation, she would not see her 13th birthday. 2 days before Alessandro left for Milan, Marco had received a phone call while polishing silverware in the pantry. 7 days, Marco. No money, and your little girl doesn't live to see next month. He had set the phone down beside the tray of forks and stood very still for a long time. Inside the safe in Alessandro's private study, wrapped in black silk, was a diamond bracelet the Moretti family had called for 4 generations by its old name, Occhio del Diavolo, the devil's eye. It had belonged to Alessandro's great-grandmother, then to Donatella. Its appraised value was $8 million. Marco had watched that bracelet for 6 months. On Tuesday, at 8:45 in the evening, Emma spiked a fever of 39.5 degrees. Sophia wrapped her in a blanket, carried her down to the staff car, and drove straight to the children's hospital in Palermo. The receipt at intake was time-stamped at 8:47. At 9:40, Marco stood in the empty hallway outside Alessandro's study, drawing on a pair of thin latex gloves. In his other hand he held a small square of clear silicone, pressed and shaped over the last 3 days from a coffee cup Sophia had left on the kitchen counter. On its surface sat the whorls and ridges of her right thumbprint. He entered the study. He crossed to the safe. He held the silicone patch against the reader, and he keyed in the combination he had watched Sophia enter twice in the last year. When she thought he was not paying attention, the safe opened. He lifted the velvet box and unwrapped the black silk. For one short moment he allowed himself to look at the bracelet, at the way the diamonds caught the low light of the desk lamp. Then he slid it into an inner pocket and closed the safe. He was not finished. He carried a portable drive to the security console next door, opened the villa's video system, and cut out the true recording of the last hour. In its place he inserted a doctored file he had built over 3 weeks. Grainy footage of a slender woman in dark clothes, hair pinned up like Sophia's, entering the study at 9:40. The face was never quite visible. It never needed to be. Before he left, he pressed the silicone patch one more time, this time against the polished handle of the safe. A single false thumbprint. The kind of mistake a nervous thief would leave. At 10:30, headlights swept the driveway. Sophia carried Emma up the marble steps with a prescription bag in her free hand and a fever-drowsy child on her shoulder. She sat by the small bed until past midnight, wiping the little forehead with a cool cloth, humming softly. She did not know that in a room 3 corridors away, a black silk bundle now lay hidden inside the false bottom of Marco Bianchi's suitcase. She did not know that the nightmare waiting for her was already time-stamped, already recorded, already signed with her name. She only knew that her daughter's fever was breaking, and that for tonight, at least, that was enough. At 7 o'clock the next morning, Marco Bianchi walked into the great hall of the villa with the calm face of a man who had rehearsed his grief for hours. He struck a small brass bell on the sideboard. Within minutes, the senior staff and the ranking capos had gathered along the marble floor. Marco waited until every eye was on him. The devil's eye is gone. The room froze. The Occhio del Diavolo was not simply a jewel. It was Signora Donatella's last living presence in the house. Marco opened a laptop. On the wall screen he played the doctored footage. A slender woman in dark clothes, hair pinned up, entering the study at 9:40. He froze the frame, pointed to the timestamp, and read out the false thumbprint match from the safe's biometric log. Sophia Ricci, he said quietly. It gives me no pleasure to say her name. No one asked to verify the video. No one suggested waiting for Alessandro. Marco Bianchi had been the second heartbeat of the Moretti household for 20 years. 4 members of the security team went upstairs. They came into Sophia's small room without knocking. She was still asleep, one arm curled around Emma. When the hands closed on her arm, she woke with a gasp. They dragged her down the marble staircase with her bare feet skidding on the stone. Emma, jolted awake, stumbled after them in her nightgown. In the great hall they made Sophia stand at the center of the floor. Every face in the household stared at her. I did not take anything, Sophia said, her voice cracking. Last night I took Emma to the hospital. Her fever was almost 40. I have the receipt. Please, someone, look at the receipt. Marco's expression did not change. You prepared the alibi very carefully, Sophia. It only proves you planned this. Emma reached her mother's legs and locked her small arms around them, sobbing. One of the security men caught her by the shoulder and pried her loose. She landed on the marble on her hands and knees and did not stop screaming. Marco stepped forward. He unpinned the small silver head of staff badge from Sophia's uniform and set it on the sideboard as if it were unclean. 2 women searched her belongings in front of everyone, holding up a photograph of Emma's first birthday for the room to see, and then dropping it back into the box. You have 30 minutes, Marco said. You will not contact the signor. You will not return to this property. This is the final decision of this house. No one spoke. No one met her eyes. Sophia lifted her weeping daughter into her arms, walked back upstairs to pack a single suitcase, and 28 minutes later she walked out through the great iron gate with a 4-year-old on her hip and 200 euros in her wallet. The gate closed behind her with the soft mechanical hum it always made. Not a single voice inside the walls said goodbye. She drove until she could not see the road anymore, then pulled off at a highway motel on the outskirts of Palermo and paid for 1 night in cash. The room smelled of old cigarettes. Emma, exhausted past crying, fell asleep across the pillow, still holding her stuffed rabbit. Sophia sat on the tile floor of the small bathroom and turned the shower on so her daughter would not hear. She did not know how long she cried. When some sound outside made her lift her head, she realized the shower had gone cold and her hands had stopped shaking only because they had gone numb. In the bedroom, Emma had woken up. She had heard, through the thin door, the sound her mother did not want her to hear. She did not knock. She went back to the small pile of her clothes on the chair, dug into the pocket of her little coat, and drew out the silver ring shaped like a wolf's head. She turned it in her fingers, tilted it toward the lamp, and read the numbers scratched inside the band, one by one, the way her mother had taught her on the microwave. The old cracked phone Sophia had thrown onto the bedside table was still there. At 11:47 at night, a small, trembling hand began to press the buttons, one number at a time. The elevator down from the 42nd floor moved too slowly. Alessandro Moretti stood in the middle of it with his coat over one arm and the small black phone still warm in his hand, and by the time the doors opened onto the lobby he had already dialed the second number of his night. Vittorio. Are you awake? I am now, signore. Vittorio De Luca was the head of Alessandro's personal security detail. Before that he had spent 14 years as an investigator with Interpol. He was 60 years old, gray-haired, and one of 2 people in the world Alessandro trusted without condition. Listen to me carefully, Alessandro said. The Devil's Eye is being reported missing. Sophia has been accused. Marco threw her out. There was a pause. Signor. Sophia did not do this. I know. I need 4 things from you tonight. Pull the original security footage from the main server. Not the household copy. Not anything Marco has touched. Second, an independent forensic reading of the fingerprints on the safe from someone Marco does not know exists. Third, Marco's financial records for the last 6 months. Every account, every transfer, every debt. And the fourth, find Sophia and Emma. They are somewhere near Palermo. Move them to the Via Ruggiero apartment. Tonight. Consider it done, Signore. And Vittorio. No one at the estate is to know I'm coming back to Sicily. Especially not Marco. He hung up and dialed the small phone again. Emma picked up on the second ring, still whispering, Emma, you did a very brave thing. Now I need you to give the phone to your mother. Tell her Uncle Alessandro is on the other end. She will come. He heard the small footsteps across cheap carpet. He heard a knock on a thin door. Mama, it's for you. There was a longer silence than he expected. Then the sound of a door opening. Signor Moretti. Sophia's voice was hoarse, so quiet he had to press the phone harder to his ear. Signor, I swear on my daughter's life, I did not touch that safe. I never, Sophia. He said her name the way he had wanted to say it for 7 years, and only now, at the worst hour of her life, could he find a way. I know you did not do it. Stay where you are. My people are coming for you. Do not open the door for anyone but them. They will know your name and Emma's name. There was a small, broken sound on the other end that he understood was the moment she believed him. Then she wept in a way she had not allowed herself to weep all night, because for 24 hours she had been the only person in the world who thought she was innocent, and now there was one more. His car pulled onto the ring road toward the private airstrip. Somewhere 500 kilometers to the south, a small girl was pressing her face into her mother's shoulder in a room that smelled of old cigarettes, and neither of them knew that a plane was already fueling on a runway to bring the whole night to them. Have you ever felt what it is to have the most powerful person in the room choose to believe you when everyone else has already made up their minds? 30 minutes later, an armored car with tinted windows pulled up outside the motel. 2 men in dark coats knocked on room 14 and spoke Emma's name through the door. Sophia opened it with her daughter in her arms. They were driven, in silence, to a small, unmarked apartment on Via Ruggiero, 3 streets from the sea. It had clean sheets, hot water, and a locked door. It was the first safe place Sophia had stood inside in 24 hours. At the estate, no one knew anything. Marco slept soundly in the head steward's suite, believing the story he had told was already sealed by morning. By the time the sun came up over the Tyrrhenian coast, Vittorio had 4 teams working through the night, and the man they were working against did not yet know his own name was written at the top of the file. At 4 a.m, the small phone rang once, and Alessandro answered before it could ring a second time. Signore, Vittorio said. His voice had the low, even tone he used only when he had put something in his hand that could not be argued with. We have it. All of it. Alessandro was sitting in the back of a car parked 2 streets from the Via Ruggiero apartment, watching the sky over Palermo begin to turn from black to the color of old iron. He did not move. Tell me, the footage first. I went straight to the main server. The raw drive, not the household copy. Marco cut the true recording of the study between 9:38 and 10:02 last night and dropped in a doctored file. He did clean work on the interior camera, but he did not touch the hallway cameras outside the study. He could not. Those feed to a separate line. The hallway footage shows him entering the study at 9:40. He is wearing the spare black jacket he keeps in the staff locker. He is inside for 11 minutes. He comes out with his right hand in his jacket pocket. It is unambiguous. Alessandro let out a slow breath he had not known he was holding. The fingerprint, Vittorio went on. I brought in Ferraro, the forensics man from Rome. He worked on it for 2 hours. The print on the safe handle is not Sophia's finger. It is a silicone lift, pressed against the metal. Under magnification, there are microscopic cracks along the ridge lines, the kind you only get from a mold that has been folded once too often. Sophia's actual thumbprint would leave sweat traces around the base of the ridges. There are none. A finger did not touch that handle, a patch did. And the hospital, Palermo Children's, confirmed the admission. Sophia arrived at 8:47 with Emma. She did not leave until 10:15. The receptionist remembers her because Emma was crying, and Sophia was singing to her in Sicilian to keep her calm. There is a security camera on the pediatric ward corridor. She is on it. There is no world in which she was in your study at 9:40. Alessandro closed his eyes for a moment. He had already believed. Now belief had become record. The money? 3 days after the alleged theft, Marco initiated a transfer of €2 million to a shell account in Napoli that our people have been tracking for 8 years. It belongs to a loan operation run by the Cervello family. It was never completed, of course, because the loan operation demands hard goods, not wires. Signore, I traced the bracelet. It was pawned yesterday afternoon at a backroom jeweler on Via dei Tribunali. I went to Naples myself. I have it. He paused. It is in my coat pocket. Signore, Alessandro sat very still in the car. Bring it to me. 20 minutes later, Vittorio walked into the small kitchen of the Via Ruggero apartment. Alessandro was already there. He had come up the stairs alone. He had knocked on the door softly. And when Sophia opened it, she had been fully dressed at 4 a.m, because she had not slept. Behind her, on the sofa, Emma lay under a wool blanket with her stuffed rabbit tucked into the crook of her neck. Her small hand was curled around something, and even in sleep she was not letting go of it. The silver wolf ring caught the light of the lamp. Sophia lowered her eyes. Thank you, for believing me. Alessandro did not answer for a moment. When he did, his voice was low. No, Sophia, I owe you the apology. For 20 years I gave Marco authority I never once checked. I made you a woman who could be destroyed in 15 minutes because I was too busy to look. I let a mother and a child walk out of my house at dawn. That was not carelessness. That was cowardice, and it was mine. Her eyes filled, but she did not let anything fall. He walked past her and knelt beside the sofa. He did not wake Emma. He only touched her hair with the back of one finger, very gently, the way a man touches something he is not sure he is allowed to keep. You are the bravest person I have ever known, little principessa, he said quietly. Then he stood up, and Vittorio placed a folded square of black silk into his hand. Alessandro opened it. The devil's eye lay against his palm, cold and still, catching the kitchen light in 100 small fractures. He looked at it for a long moment, and his face grew darker, but not for the reason a man usually darkens over $8 million. It was the weight of the 20 years he had been wrong about the hand that had put it there. At 7:30 in the morning, 3 cars pulled through the great iron gate of the Moretti estate. No one at the villa had been told they were coming. Alessandro sat in the first car with the devil's eye folded inside a black silk square in his coat. Sophia sat in the second with Emma asleep against her shoulder. Vittorio rode in the third with a leather briefcase across his knees. Alessandro did not go to the study. He went directly to the great hall. He sent word through a single housemaid. Every member of staff, every capo, every man on the property was to be in the great hall in 10 minutes. No exceptions. They came, still buttoning their jackets, whispering in small groups. At the front of the line, calm and neatly dressed, hands folded behind his back, was Marco Bianchi. He did not see the doors behind him open. He heard them and turned. Signor Moretti, I did not know you were returning today. I have already handled the theft. The Ricci woman was dismissed yesterday morning. The matter is, he stopped. Sophia had walked in behind Alessandro. She was pale, and her eyes were red, but she was standing on her own feet in her own house, and she was looking at Marco. The color went out of Marco's face in a way that had nothing to do with light. Alessandro walked past him without speaking. He crossed to the long oak table, reached into his coat, drew out the folded silk square, and laid it down. He unwrapped it once. He unwrapped it twice. The devil's eye lay against the black cloth, catching the morning light. Marco did not breathe. Vittorio stepped forward with a laptop, opened it without a word, and cast the screen onto the panel on the wall behind him. He played, in silence, 42 seconds of hallway footage from the private wing. Every face in the room watched Marco Bianchi enter Alessandro's study at 9:40 the previous night, watched him come out 11 minutes later with his right hand pressed against his jacket pocket. Vittorio did not stop there. He showed the forensic report on the silicone lift. He showed the pediatric ward footage from the Palermo Children's Hospital. He showed the wire transfer to the Cervello account. He showed a still photograph of Marco at a jeweler on Via dei Tribunali in Naples. He closed the laptop. Marco's knees gave out. He went down slowly until he was kneeling on the marble in the middle of the great hall. Signor. His voice broke. Please, my daughter, Chiara. She has a hole in her heart. The surgeon in Naples said €500,000. I owed $3 million already. They called me. They said 7 days or she would not live. I tried. I asked everyone. I had no way out. He was weeping now, openly, on the marble. Alessandro looked down at him for a long time before he spoke. You had a way out. The room was silent enough to hear it. You had my door. You had my table. You held me at my baptism, Marco. My father trusted you with his life. If you had come to my study one evening and said, Alessandro, my child is dying and I have no money, I would have written the check before you finished the sentence. That is what you had. He walked one slow step closer. You did not come to me. You stole from me. And when the theft was discovered, you put it on the shoulders of a woman who has scrubbed the floors of this house for 7 years and never taken so much as a spoon. You had her dragged down these stairs in front of every person here. You shoved a 4-year-old child onto this marble. He raised his eyes from Marco and turned to face the rest of the great hall. And you, all of you are guilty too. Not one of you asked to see the original tape. Not one of you called me. Not one of you looked at the hospital receipt she begged you to look at. Not one of you stood between that child and the hand that pushed her. No one lifted their eyes. The morning light moved slowly across the marble floor, and the great hall of the Moretti estate stayed silent, because there was nothing anyone could say. Alessandro stood at the head of the great hall, and let the silence hold for one more breath. Then he spoke, and his voice had gone somewhere colder than anger. Marco Bianchi, today I pass sentence on you in front of this entire house. Marco lifted his face from the marble. There was still hope in it. The reflex hope of a man who had lived 20 years under one roof and could not yet believe that roof would close against him. Alessandro walked around the table until he stood over him. He reached down, took hold of the small gold family crest pinned to the lapel of Marco's black jacket, and pulled it free. The pin left 2 small holes in the fabric. Alessandro turned it once between his fingers and set it on the table beside the devil's eye. He reached next for the thin gold chain around Marco's neck, the one every man who had ever sworn service to the Moretti bloodline wore against his skin. He did not unclasp it. He took a small folding knife from his pocket, opened it, and cut the chain in one clean motion. The pendant, a wolf's head in miniature, dropped into his palm. He set that on the table too. Every title you carried in this house, I take back. Every share you were paid, every account that was opened in your name under the family, every credit line, every safe house, every man in this organization who called himself your friend, gone. From this moment you are esiliato, exiled. There is no Moretti hand that will help you. There is no Moretti door that will open for you. No one in this family will speak your name. You will live, Marco, but you will live as a shadow, without a name, without a house, without a country. In the world of these men, Esilio was worse than a bullet. A bullet ended you. This ended you and let you keep walking. Marco began to shake. Signor, he crawled forward on his knees. Signore, please, my daughter, Chiara. I know I have no right. I know. But she is 12 years old. She has no one else. I am not asking for me. I am asking for her. Please. Alessandro did not answer for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed only in the smallest way, but every person in the hall felt it. Your daughter will be cared for. The surgery in Naples will be paid this afternoon. She will have the best doctors in Europe. She will have a life. Marco's face broke open in something like gratitude. But you will never see her again, Alessandro said. That is your last sentence. She will be told, one day, that a stranger paid. She will never be told it was you. She will live believing her father disappeared. That is the price you pay for what you did in this hall yesterday. The gratitude on Marco's face became something else, something that had no name. 2 men in dark suits stepped forward from the wall. They lifted him by his arms, not roughly, but without pause. They walked him the full length of the great hall, past every silent face, out through the tall double doors, down the marble steps, along the cypress drive. As they passed the great oak table, Marco turned his head, and his eyes, wet and burning, fixed for one long second on Alessandro, and then on Sophia standing quiet beside him. There was no forgiveness in that look. There was no shame. There was only a promise. The iron gate closed behind him with the same soft mechanical hum it had made for Sophia 24 hours before. Alessandro turned back to the hall. I do not want to see this again, he said. From today, no decision of consequence in this house is made by one man alone. Every order that touches money, security, or staff passes through 3 points of verification, including mine, especially mine. I gave one man 20 years of trust I never checked. That was my failure. It will not repeat. He turned last to Sophia. You are the head of this household from this morning. Every operation of this villa passes through you, every keycard, every account, every schedule. No one in this house speaks to you again the way you were spoken to yesterday. Do you understand me? Sophia lowered her eyes. She did not step forward. She did not accept the title the way another woman might have accepted it. She only said, very softly. "I only want Emma to be safe." Somewhere out beyond the coast road, an unmarked car carried Marco Bianchi north toward the ferry. He did not look at the driver. He did not eat. He did not speak. He got off in Napoli. For 3 days he moved from one backstreet bar to the next, drinking cheap grappa in rooms that smelled of old smoke and older men. He did not sleep in a bed. He did not answer the 2 calls from a Naples hospital that came to his old phone, because he no longer had the right to answer them. On the 3rd night he sat in the corner of a place near the port with his forehead against the cold glass of a bottle, and inside his chest there was nothing left of the man who had held Alessandro at his baptism. There was no remorse. There was only a name he had not spoken in 20 years. Luciano Romano. For 3 days Marco Bianchi walked the alleys of Napoli with a stubble he had not shaved and eyes that had stopped closing at night. He slept sitting up in the back rooms of bars that did not care who paid. He spent money he did not have on grappa he could no longer taste. On the 4th morning, his old phone buzzed once in the pocket of the jacket he had not taken off in 72 hours. He read the message twice before he understood it. Chiara had died in the night. A sudden failure of the heart, the doctor's note said. It had come before the surgery could be scheduled. She had gone quietly at 3:14 in the morning. Marco sat on a wooden crate outside the back door of the bar and read the message a 3rd time. The morning traffic moved past him without slowing. He rose slowly. He walked back inside the bar. He picked up the bottle he had left on the table and threw it into the mirror behind the counter, and then he began to scream. "If he had given me time, if he had given me time, my daughter would be alive." He said it once, he said it again. By the 3rd time it had stopped being grief and had become a shape. He did not blame himself. The part of him that could still do that had died with the girl at 3:14 in the morning. He blamed the man who had paid for a surgery that had come one day too late. He blamed the man who had cut a gold chain from his throat and called him a shadow. By that evening, through a middleman he had not used in 15 years, Marco had asked for an audience with the one man in southern Italy who had wanted Alessandro Moretti dead for longer than Alessandro had been in charge. Luciano Romano. The Romano family sat in Catania, in a low stone villa with bars on every window. For 3 decades they had been the shadow across every Moretti map, the rival who watched Sicily like a man watching a woman across a crowded room. Alessandro's father had killed Luciano's older brother in a Palermo bakery in 1997, and Luciano had never forgotten. 2 nights later, Marco was led into a long room with a low ceiling. Luciano Romano sat at the far end in a black leather chair, 60 years old and thin as a knife, with 20 men standing along the walls behind him. Marco walked to the center of the room and lowered himself onto both knees. "Signor Romano, I can give you everything you need to destroy Alessandro Moretti." Luciano let a long moment pass. Then he laughed once, quietly, without pleasure. "And if you are lying to me, you understand what happens?" "I understand." Luciano lifted one hand. A man behind him set a leather-bound notebook and a pen on the small table between them. Marco began to talk. He talked for 4 hours without stopping. He gave Luciano the territorial map of the Moretti holdings, from Trapani to Calabria, every district, every underboss. He gave him the 8 transport routes for cargo, drugs going north and cash going south, with every stop and every corrupt uniform paid at each border. He gave him the locations of the 12 armories with internal guard layouts drawn from memory on graph paper. He gave him the list of 30 officials on the Moretti payroll, prosecutors and customs officers, and 1 deputy in Rome. He gave him the numbers of 3 laundering accounts in Zurich. He gave him the architectural plans of the villa above the coast, including the old escape tunnel from the father's time that Alessandro had forgotten to seal. He gave him Alessandro's private travel schedule for the next 4 weeks. He gave him the 2 weak points in the estate's perimeter watch. When Marco was finished, Luciano Romano closed the notebook slowly with both hands. 20 years I have waited for a night like this. Alessandro Moretti, you are about to lose everything. He turned to the men behind him. Call every soldier in Catania, every gun we own. I want 200 men armed within 72 hours. Buy heavy from the Ukrainians. This time we do not push at his edges. This time we take the island. He looked back down at Marco. You have earned a chair in this house, Signor Bianchi. Sit. Marco stood, and he sat, and somewhere very far away, in a hospital he would never enter again, a 12-year-old girl lay in a small white room with no one to hold her hand. 6 nights after Marco Bianchi sat down in Luciano Romano's leather chair, the first bomb fell on Sicily at 3 in the morning. It fell on the armory outside Palermo. 3 men in black coats climbed the fence at 2:58, cut the throat of the guard at the side door before he could turn around, and rolled 6 petrol bombs into the storage bay. The building went up in a column of flame that lit the road for a kilometer in every direction. 2 minutes later, in Messina, a heavier device tore through the second armory. It was military grade. It left almost nothing standing. 2 minutes after that, on the coastal highway between Catania and Enna, 2 Moretti transport trucks were forced off the road by a wall of parked vehicles and set on fire with the drivers still inside. Farther south, a third truck was hit at the same instant on the road out of Agrigento. 3 loads of product, 30 million euros gone in the time it took to strike a match. 3 restaurants across the island, the quiet fronts through which the family had washed its money for years, went up almost together. The one in Trapani lost the whole block. The one in Ragusa killed a passing waiter who had never known who owned the building he worked in. In 5 separate places across Sicily, groups of Moretti soldiers who had been standing quiet, watch outside, safe houses and clubs were cut down by gunmen who knew exactly where to stand. 12 strikes, all coordinated, all within 30 minutes. At 3:36 in the morning, Alessandro Moretti was standing barefoot on the stone floor of his study, still buttoning his shirt, with 3 phones in front of him and a 4th ringing on the desk. Vittorio was already in the room. His face had gone the color of iron. Palermo Armory is a total loss. Messina, total loss. 3 trucks burned on the ring roads. Corleone Club hit. 15 of ours dead, confirmed dead. 9 more we cannot reach on the radio. Alessandro did not answer. He was looking at the map on the wall behind Vittorio. They hit the Ragusa restaurant. Signore, I heard you. They knew the guard rotation at the Trapani Armory. They knew about the second entrance at Messina. They knew the timing window on the Agrigento truck. Alessandro finally spoke. His voice was very quiet. There is only one man who knew all of those things at once. Vittorio said nothing. They have the whole map, Vittorio. They have every route. They have every armory. They have the safe houses that only Marco ever signed off on. This is not a fight. This is a coronation. Luciano is not trying to hurt me. He is trying to take the island. Alessandro reached down, picked up the 3rd phone, and gave 3 orders in 3 sentences. He called the 4 ranking capos to the underground strategy room below the villa. He called Enzo, Dante, and Rocco directly. He told the perimeter to double. Then he turned and walked, without hurry, down the private corridor to the west wing. Sophia met him at the door of her small apartment. She was already dressed, holding Emma against her hip. The child was awake and quiet, watching him with wide, still eyes. "You are moving," he said. "Now. Both of you." He led them down the service stairs and through a small door in the wine cellar that most of the household did not know existed. Behind the door, a short concrete corridor ended in a heavy steel hatch. Behind the hatch was a room with a bed, a small kitchen, a filtered air system, and walls the German engineers had certified against military ordnance. It did not appear on any architectural plan of the villa. Marco Bianchi did not know it was there. Alessandro sat Emma on the edge of the small bed. He crouched down in front of her. "Uncle," Emma said. Her voice was small. "Are you scared?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I am not scared when I have you and your mama nearby," he said. "I only need you to stay in this room with your mama. Can you do that for me?" She nodded once, seriously. He stood up. He turned to Sophia. "Will you be all right?" she asked. She said it lightly, but her voice was not light. "I promised you I would come back," he said. "I keep that promise. Watch her for me." He reached inside his jacket and took out a small handgun. He turned it over in his palm once, then put it into Sophia's hand. "You've had 2 months of practice with this. That is enough. If that door opens and the person walking through it is not me or Vittorio, do not think, just pull the trigger." Her fingers closed around it. Her hand was shaking, but her eyes were not. He looked at her 1 second longer than any of the 7 years before had allowed him. Then he stepped back through the hatch, and the steel door sealed shut between them with a heavy mechanical breath, cutting him off from the 2 people in the world he was fighting to protect. Alessandro Moretti did not react the way a wounded animal reacts, which was what Luciano Romano was counting on. By 4 in the morning, 3 men were standing in the underground strategy room below the villa with him. Enzo, 42, the mind. Dante, 38, the technician. Rocco, 50, the fighter. Between them they had 60 years of loyalty to the Moretti bloodline. Alessandro laid his hand flat on the map on the table. Marco gave them everything. Every armory. Every route. Every rotation. That is the assumption we build on. So we do not defend what he gave them, we give it away. Enzo lifted his eyes. "Signore, step 1. Every position on Marco's map, we retreat. Publicly, loudly. Let it look on their surveillance as if we are collapsing under the first hit. Luciano will read it as victory. He will move faster. Step 2. Every rifle, every case of ammunition, every gram of product still standing, moves tonight to warehouse 13. He looked up at Dante. You built it. He does not know it exists. Dante nodded once. Warehouse 13 had been finished 18 months after Marco stopped signing off on infrastructure. It sat in a limestone quarry outside Caltanissetta, buried under a working cement plant. Step 3. Marco is a creature of pattern. Every operation he ever planned, he planned the same way. If he laid out our chessboard, then he also laid out theirs. We know where they will attack next, because we know how he thinks. And step 4? Rocco said. You take a car south tonight, to Reggio Calabria. Sit down with the Vaccaro family and the Costanzo cousins. Tell them Romano is coming across the strait next, whether he means to or not. They owe my father, and Romano insulted their capo in 2011. Cut the retreat line. The 3 men left the room before dawn. By nightfall of the same day, the trap had opened. 40 Romano soldiers hit the emptied armory outside Enna at 11 at night, expecting to find the last of the Moretti stockpile abandoned in the panic. They found instead 16 shooters in the roof beams, 3 claymores wired to the loading bay door, and a switch Dante threw from a van 2 kilometers away. Not one of the 40 men walked back to Catania. The second engagement came 36 hours later. A Romano armored convoy tried to move through the mountain pass at Portella della Ginestra, along the exact route Marco had once mapped. Alessandro had wired the pass on the second day. The lead vehicle went first. The vehicles behind it, boxed in by cliff on one side and drop on the other, went one by one. The third engagement broke Luciano's mind. 30 Romano assassins closed on what their maps told them was the Moretti country estate northwest of Ragusa. It was not the country estate, it was a shell. Alessandro had ordered it stripped and rebuilt as a decoy inside 24 hours. The 30 men breached the front doors and stepped into a courtyard with automatic fire waiting from 4 angles. In a low villa in Catania, Luciano Romano threw a glass of red wine so hard against the wall that the stem shattered in his hand. He knows before we move. How? Marco stood at the edge of the room. His hands were shaking. That's not possible. I gave you everything. Luciano turned his head slowly. Perhaps, he said, and his voice was very soft now. You did not know as much as you thought you did, Marco. By the end of the 5th day, the accounting was in. Of the 200 fighters Luciano had marshaled from Catania and the Ukrainian shipment, roughly 40 were still alive. 80% of his war had died in 5 nights. The Moretti family had buried 12 men. Luciano ordered what remained of his force to retreat, quietly, up into the fortified compound on the western slope of Mount Etna. Behind those stone walls, he began to think about Plan B. And behind him, at the edge of the room, Marco Bianchi lifted his eyes from the floor and looked at a photograph pinned to Luciano's mapboard, a photograph he himself had taken through a long lens 6 months earlier, a woman with dark hair, a little girl on her hip. On the evening of the 5th day, Alessandro Moretti came home. He walked in through the great front doors of the villa with his coat over one arm and blood on the collar of his shirt. Not his own, mostly. His left shoulder had been grazed by a bullet outside Ragusa on the 3rd night, and the shirt beneath his jacket had stiffened where the wound had opened again. He had not slept in more than an hour at a time in 5 days. He had not eaten a proper meal in 3. The house was very quiet. He walked down the long corridor to the private wing, and he stopped in the doorway of the small sitting room without meaning to. Sophia was on the couch with a book open across her knees. Emma was tucked against her side under a blanket, sleepy but not yet asleep, listening to the story with the seriousness only 4-year-olds bring to important things. A single lamp burned beside them. The steel hatch in the wine cellar had been unlocked that afternoon. This was the first hour in 5 days they had been out. Emma saw him first. She was off the couch and across the room, before Sophia had lifted her head, and her small arms locked around his leg with a fierceness that made him grip the doorframe. "Uncle, you're hurt. Uncle, does it hurt?" He knelt down and picked her up, and the shoulder screamed, and he did not let it show on his face. "Only a little, Principessa, only a little." Sophia was already on her feet. She did not speak. She led him to the kitchen, sat him on a stool at the marble island, and brought a bowl of warm water, a bottle of clear alcohol from the cupboard, gauze from the drawer where the household kept small things for children. She cut the sleeve of his shirt with kitchen scissors. When she peeled the fabric away from the wound, she made a small sound, and then she made no sound at all. She worked. Her hands trembled once and then steadied. Emma stood at Alessandro's other side, holding two of his fingers with her whole hand, watching her mother work. "Why?" Sophia said quietly, without looking up. "Why do you do all of this? For us?" He looked at the top of her bent head for a long moment. "Because you did not deserve what happened to you. Because Emma deserves a childhood that does not smell like this house has smelled this week. And because he stopped." Her hands paused on the gauze. She lifted her eyes. "Because? Because I have been quiet for 7 years, Sophia. That is a long time. I do not want to be quiet anymore." She did not answer. She did not need to. She held his eyes for one full breath, and then she looked down again, and she finished the bandage without her hands shaking at all. There was no confession, no promise, only that. Later, Emma fell asleep with her head on her mother's lap, and her small fist closed around the silver wolf ring, as she had every night for 2 weeks. Alessandro sat in the armchair across from them, watching them the way a man watches something he has finally understood he was allowed to want. 15 years. 15 years he had been the head of the family, and in 15 years he had never once sat in a room like this. He had eaten dinner with his lawyers. He had eaten dinner with governors. He had never eaten dinner in a home, because he had never had one. That night the three of them sat at the small kitchen table together. He tried to cook. It was terrible. Emma laughed at the pasta so hard she had to put her fork down, and Sophia bit the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing too. And Alessandro, who had not laughed at himself in a decade, laughed at himself for the first time in a decade. Somewhere between the burned garlic and the little girl's giggle, he made a promise to himself he did not say out loud. "I will keep them, whatever it costs." 200 kilometers to the east, in an unlit apartment on the second floor of a building in Catania, Marco Bianchi and Luciano Romano sat opposite each other with a photograph on the table between them. "We cannot hit him directly again," Marco said. His voice was flat and low. "Every man we send at his walls dies. But there is a way, signore. A way that makes him walk into the ground himself." He turned the photograph so Luciano could see it right side up. A woman with dark hair, a child on her hip, standing at the edge of a garden. "His weakness is not his empire," Marco said. "It is these two." Luciano Romano smiled without warmth. "Very good. Tell me your plan." The next morning, at 7 o'clock, Alessandro flew to Rome. He did not want to go. The war had cost him too much cash and too much political goodwill, and the Allied families on the mainland had been calling for 2 days demanding a face-to-face reckoning. If he did not sit down with them by noon, he would come home to a second enemy on his northern flank. He gave Vittorio, still bruised, still limping from the last week, one instruction on the front steps: 20 men on the walls. Not 15, 20. And you do not leave those two for a single minute. Not the bathroom, not the kitchen, not for coffee. Do you hear me? On my life, signor. On mine too. The plane took off at 7:40. The mistake had already been made, and neither of them yet knew it. Marco Bianchi had lived in that villa for 20 years. He had drawn the perimeter watch himself. He knew which 2 of the 12 interior cameras had a blind angle where the west corridor met the servants' stair. He knew that the man on the north wall shift always took his coffee at 11:10 in the morning and stepped inside for 4 minutes. He knew, above all, about the old escape tunnel from Alessandro's father's time, the one that ran from the wine cellar out under the vineyard and surfaced in a stone shed a full kilometer beyond the perimeter fence. Alessandro had ordered it sealed the year he inherited the house. He had told Marco to see to it. Marco had never sealed it. At 11:12 in the morning, 15 Romano gunmen came up through the shed door in single file. Marco walked ahead of them with a small canister in his hand. They vented CS gas into the interior air system through a service duct only Marco knew existed. 12 of the 20 men on the walls went down before they understood what was in their lungs. Vittorio, who had been standing outside the door of the sitting room, took 2 men with a knife and his bare hands before a third put a blade through his side, and a fourth through his shoulder, and a fifth through the muscle above his hip. He did not die. He fell against the wall, and he did not move, and they thought he was dead, which was the only reason he lived. Sophia was bathing Emma in the small bathroom of the private wing when she heard the first muffled report through the wall. She knew the sound of a suppressed weapon. She had learned it in 8 weeks of quiet lessons in the empty basement, because Alessandro had insisted. She lifted Emma out of the tub, still soapy, wrapped a towel around her, opened the wardrobe in the bedroom, and pushed her small daughter into the back of it behind the winter coats. "You do not make a sound, mia cara. Not one sound. Mama comes back for you. Do you understand me?" Emma's eyes were huge. She nodded. Sophia closed the wardrobe door. She took the small handgun from the drawer of the bedside table, chambered a round, and stood between the wardrobe and the bedroom door. When the first man came through, she shot him in the chest. When the second came through behind him, she shot him in the throat. Her hands were steady, her breathing was steady. Alessandro would have been proud of her, and she thought about that for one clear second. Then 5 more came through the door. They took the pistol from her hand and put her on her knees. They did not shoot her. They had orders. Marco walked into the bedroom last, unhurried, with a small pistol of his own. He looked at the 2 dead men on the floor. He looked at Sophia. He crossed to the wardrobe and opened it himself. Emma was pressed against the back wall behind the coats, still in her towel, water still in her hair. She saw him and she began to scream, "Bad, Uncle Marco! Bad! Don't touch me! Don't touch me!" Marco reached in and took her by the arm. "That's right, Principessa," he said, and his voice was almost gentle. "Uncle Marco is very bad, and Uncle Marco is going to make your Uncle Alessandro cry the way your mama cried." They carried them out through the same tunnel they had come in through. An armored truck was waiting in the field beyond the vineyard. It drove for 2 hours into the volcanic country west of Etna, to a stone fortress on a slope of black lava, where Luciano Romano was already waiting on the terrace. In Rome, in the middle of a sentence about port fees in Palermo, Alessandro's phone lit up with a video message from an unknown number. He opened it. Sophia sat tied to a wooden chair with a split lip and blood on her cheek. Emma stood beside her in a white bathrobe far too big for her, calling out, "Uncle Alessandro, come and get me! Come and get me!" Marco stepped into the frame from the side, unhurried, smiling. "Alessandro, you have 6 hours to walk into Luciano Romano's compound. You come alone. Or..." He raised his pistol and set the muzzle against Emma's small forehead. The video ended. Alessandro was already on his feet. The men around the conference table were still speaking. He did not hear them. He was out of the room, past his own security, down the marble stairs of the palazzo, and into the car before anyone caught up with him. The Empire could wait. The 2 people he loved could not. A private helicopter set down on the front lawn of the Moretti estate 40 minutes after the video had ended. Alessandro stepped out before the blades had finished slowing. He crossed the gravel drive without looking at the 2 men who tried to walk beside him. He went in through the side entrance, and what he found inside the villa did not make him stop and it did not make him hurry. It only made him walk in a way that was very quiet. 12 of his men lay along the corridors with sheets over them. Vittorio was strapped to a stretcher in the front hall, 3 field bandages on his side, an IV line already running, still conscious enough to lift his hand as Alessandro passed. Alessandro caught the hand and held it for 1 second and did not speak. Then he let it go and kept walking. He did not shout. He did not weep. Whatever moved through him did not come out on his face, but the 2 capos who had come in behind him stepped back without being told, because there are angers that do not need voices. He went down to the strategy room below the villa. Enzo, Dante, and Rocco were already at the map. Enzo looked up as he came in and started before Alessandro had reached the table. "Signore, this is a trap. Everyone in this room can read it. You walk into that compound alone and you die on the courtyard stone and they die 20 minutes after you. We need time. Let us open a channel. Ransom. Territory. Anything. Buy hours." Alessandro said nothing. He set his phone down on the table and played the video again. He played it once. He played it a second time. He watched Emma's small face crumple around the word Alessandro, and he watched the blood on Sophia's cheek from a cut she had probably taken during the 2 minutes she had held the door of that bedroom against 5 men. He closed the phone. "It is a trap," he said. "I know. I am still going. Not alone. But not the way they think." He put his hand on the map. 30 men. Our best. Split into 3 teams. Enzo, you take the main assault. Coming down the western slope on my signal. Not before. Dunci. You cut every line in and out of that compound the moment I cross the front gate. Power, radio, satellite phone, everything. Rocco, extraction. Your only job is Sophia and Emma. Nothing else in that building matters to you. Not Marco. Not Luciano. Nothing. He straightened. I go in through the front door as if I am obeying his terms. Alone. Unarmed on the outside. That is what they will see. 5 snipers move ahead of me and take firing positions on the surrounding ridges. Not our men. Freelance. Former special forces. I have 3 names in Trieste who owe me favors. Dante. Get them on a plane in the next 90 minutes. Signore, Dante said. Heavy body armor under the suit. Night vision for everyone else. Breaching charges for both interior gates. Move. They moved. There was one last thing. Alessandro walked. alone, down the private corridor, to the west wing. He opened the door of Sophia's bedroom. He did not turn on the light. He crossed to the small vanity by the window, and he stood for a long moment looking at the photograph she kept there. It was a picture of her and Emma on the beach at Cefalù, taken the summer before, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. He reached into his inner coat pocket and drew out a small velvet box he had been carrying for almost 3 months. He had ordered it made in a workshop in Florence, from silver of the same weight and grain as the ring on Emma's small finger. It was a wolf's head as well, but slightly narrower at the muzzle, and the inside of the band carried an inscription he had chosen, without ever quite letting himself believe he would give it away. Ti aspetterò per sempre. I will wait for you always. He closed the box in his fist. He held it for a long second against his chest. I am bringing you home, he said quietly to the empty room. Both of you. I promise. He slid the box into the inner pocket of his shirt, over his heart, and he went back down the stairs. At 11:14 at night, 6 armored vehicles pulled out of the front gate of the Moretti estate in single file. They did not use their headlights until they had cleared the coast road. Above the last car, the taillights blurred into the black shape of the countryside, and the road turned inland toward the volcanic slopes of Mount Etna and the stone fortress of Luciano Romano, waiting on the mountain with a woman tied to a chair and a small girl in a bathrobe that was much too big for her. At 2 a.m, the Moretti column stopped its engines a kilometer below the compound and killed its lights. The Romano fortress sat on the western slope of Mount Etna like something that had grown out of the volcano itself. It was a converted castello of black stone, 400 years old, with a central courtyard and 3-tiered walls and 100 armed men posted along its parapets and its towers. Alessandro stood in the darkness of the tree line and looked up at it for one long moment. Then he turned to Dante. Now, Dante threw a switch on a black case in the back of the second van. The signal jammer engaged. 30 seconds later, he cut the underground power line to the fortress, and every light along the walls went out at once. Only the emergency lanterns in the courtyard and the great hall stayed lit. Alessandro walked out of the tree line toward the front gate alone. He wore his suit jacket unbuttoned. He held both hands loose at his sides. On his hip, in an open holster, he wore a single visible pistol, the way a man wears a gesture. Beneath the shirt, over his ribs, sat a full plate of high-grade armor. Above him on the black ridges to the east and the north, 5 men from Trieste lay flat behind rifles they had been sighting for the last 40 minutes. He walked up to the gate and raised his empty hands. From the second-floor balcony of the great hall, Luciano Romano laughed. It was a real laugh. The laugh of a man who had waited 20 years. The great Alessandro Moretti. Come at last. On his knees, the gate opened. Alessandro walked through it, across the courtyard, and up the wide stone steps into the great hall. He counted men as he went. 30 in the courtyard, 15 along the interior walls, more above. Inside the hall he saw them. Sophia was tied upright to one of the 4 stone columns that supported the vaulted ceiling. Her left eye was swollen shut. Her lower lip was split. A thin line of blood had dried down the side of her jaw. She lifted her head when he came in, and her one good eye found him, and it did not close. Beside her, in a small iron cage no larger than an animal crate, sat Emma. She had a torn white bathrobe wrapped around her, and her hair was still stiff from bathwater that had gone hours dry, and when she saw him, she pressed her face against the bars and made a sound that was not quite a word. Marco Bianchi stood on the balcony beside Luciano, holding a heavy hunting rifle across his chest. Luciano spread his arms. Sign the transfer of every Moretti territory in Sicily to me, right now. My lawyer has the papers. Let them go first, Alessandro said. Marco leaned forward on the balcony rail. No. After you sign, all 3 of you die, but we let you watch them die first. Alessandro let his right hand drift, casually, up to his chest. He touched the small ring in the pocket of his shirt with 2 fingers. The wire in his ear clicked once. 5 shots rang out at the same instant from 5 different angles, and 5 men on the wall towers dropped where they stood. Before their bodies had finished falling, Enzo and 12 fighters came over the rear wall of the compound in a controlled rush, low and disciplined. Dante's team pitched smoke and flashbang canisters through the tall windows of the great hall, and the room went white, and then blind, and then white again. On the roof above, Rocco and 5 men dropped from ropes into the corner tower, took the guards there in 20 seconds, and began working down through the interior. The war between the 2 families finally began. Gunfire echoed off the black stone in every direction. Smoke rolled across the courtyard. Somewhere on the second floor, a curtain caught fire. Men shouted in Sicilian, in Ukrainian, in the language of pain. Alessandro drew a second pistol from the small of his back under his jacket, and he moved. He shot the 2 men closest to Sophia in the head, one after the other, and cut the third down as he turned. He crossed the last 3 meters to her at a run. He cut the ropes at her wrists with a folding blade. He put his body between her and the balcony. "Stay here," he said. "Do not move. Do not stand up." He turned to the cage. Emma was pressed against the bars with both small hands. Alessandro raised his pistol, angled it against the iron lock, turned his face away from her, and fired 1 round. The lock broke. He wrenched the door open and lifted her out with 1 arm, and she wrapped both arms around his neck and did not let go. "Uncle is here," he said into her hair. "Uncle is here. Don't be afraid." Around them the ancient hall burned. Moretti men, few but disciplined, cut through Romano men, many but scattered. Blood was already dark on the stone floor of a castello that had stood 400 years without knowing what one more war would look like. Alessandro shifted Emma into Sophia's arms and put his body between the 2 of them and the balcony. "Move," he said quietly. "Stay behind me. Cross to the back corridor. Do not stop." They moved in a low, tight line along the base of the 4 stone columns, using each one as cover as they passed. Sophia held Emma against her chest with both arms wrapped around the small body. Alessandro walked backward beside them, a pistol in each hand, watching every angle at once. On the balcony above, Marco Bianchi had been hit in the thigh by a stray round from the rear breach. He had gone down onto 1 knee behind the marble balustrade. He was still holding the hunting rifle. Through the smoke, he watched Alessandro Moretti walking 3 living people out of his kill room, and something inside him that had already stopped being a man made its last decision. He turned his head and shouted to a Romano gunman crouched in the shadow of the far archway, "Shoot him! In the back! Now!" At the same instant, Marco lifted the rifle himself. 2 barrels came up at once. Sophia had been half a step behind Alessandro. She saw both of them at the same moment. She saw the shape of the sniper in the archway raising his weapon, and she saw Marco on the balcony raising his. She had time to think one thing, and it was not a thought. It was only a shape, and the shape was Alessandro's back. She pushed Emma out toward him. "Take her!" He turned at the sound of her voice, and she was already moving past him. She was faster than she had ever been in her life. She threw her shoulder into his chest and shoved him sideways, past the column, out of the line of both guns. The first bullet, from the archway, hit her high in the chest just under the collarbone. It came out of her back in a spray she never saw. Marco fired a half-second later, and the second bullet went into her lower stomach as she was already falling. Alessandro caught his own balance against the column, still holding Emma, and for 1 full heartbeat he did not move, because he did not yet understand what he had just seen. "Mama!" The scream came out of Emma the way something is torn. She saw her mother collapse in the smoke. She saw the dark stain blooming across the front of Sophia's blouse. She saw the light on her mother's face, and it was wrong. "Sophia!" The shout came out of Alessandro from somewhere he had not opened in 15 years. He set Emma down against the column, hard, and he was on his knees beside Sophia before her body had settled on the stone. He gathered her up against his chest. Her weight was already going. Her eyes found his. Blood was on her mouth. She smiled. She actually smiled. "Emma," she whispered. Her voice was barely a breath. "Take care of her for me." "No." He shook his head once, sharply. "No, you do not go. You do not leave me. Do you hear me, Sophia? You do not leave me." She lifted one hand and touched his face. Her fingertips left a small red mark on his cheekbone. The first tears he had shed since his mother's funeral fell without him knowing they were coming. "You believed me," she said softly. That was enough. Emma crawled the last meter across the bloody stone on her hands and knees and pressed her small face against her mother's face. "Mama! Mama! Don't sleep! You promised me! You promised!" Alessandro tore his own shirt open with one hand. He ripped the fabric down and pressed it, folded, hard, against the wound in her chest. He pressed the second layer against her stomach. "Rocco," he said, into the small radio at his collar, and his voice came out level in a way that was terrifying. "Rocco, now. I do not care about the fight. She needs the helicopter. Palermo. Dr. Rossi is on standby. Move." Rocco was there within 20 seconds. 3 men behind him with a folded stretcher. They lifted Sophia between them with the fabric still pressed to her chest. Emma tried to climb on with her. Alessandro caught the small girl by the waist and held her against his side and did not let her follow. "Stay with me, Principessa. Mama has to fly now. We come after." He watched them carry Sophia out through the rear archway into the smoke. Rocco did not look back. Rocco understood. Alessandro stood up slowly. Emma was crying against his hip. He set her down inside the shelter of the column and told her to close her eyes and cover her ears. He turned and looked around the great hall. There were 2 pistols on the stone floor beside the dead man closest to him. He bent and picked them both up without hurrying. He weighed them once in his hands. He looked up at the balcony. Luciano Romano was staring down at him with an expression that had gone still. Marco Bianchi was still on one knee behind the balustrade, and he had begun, without being conscious of it, to shake. The Alessandro, who had walked through the front gate a quarter of an hour earlier, was no longer in the room. What was in the room now had cold, empty eyes, and it was climbing the stairs. The Alessandro Moretti, who had walked through the front gate of that fortress, had been a strategist. The man crossing the great hall now was not. He touched the small radio at his collar one more time. Enzo, all units, new order, no prisoners. Every Romano in this compound, every man, now. He did not wait for confirmation. He did not stay in the rear where a boss of his station belonged. He walked forward into the smoke, both pistols in his hands, and he led the reckoning himself. The first man came at him from behind a fallen column with a knife. Alessandro shot him twice in the chest without slowing his stride. The second man rose from beside an overturned table with a submachine gun already raised. Alessandro shot him under the jaw before the gun could level. The third and fourth had taken firing positions behind the stone lip of the great hearth. He killed the fourth around the edge of the third, and the third the moment he tried to shift. He kept walking. 4 more went down between the entrance and the staircase, some to bullets, one to a small blade drawn from inside his sleeve and driven into the soft place under the ear. His shirt front was dark now, and none of the blood on it was his own. Enzo and his men came in behind him. They saw their capo walking into the fire himself, and something ignited in them that no order could have lit. They began cutting through the Romano defenders with a speed the fortress had not seen from either side all night. Above them on the balcony, Luciano Romano was shouting into a radio that no longer worked, calling orders to men who could no longer hear him. At the base of the great stone staircase, 3 men stepped out to block Alessandro's path. They were Luciano's personal guards, the closest ring, the ones he had brought from Palermo when he had been young. They fanned wide the way men do who know how to work together. Alessandro emptied 1 pistol into the first man's chest. He threw the empty gun into the second man's face and drew a folding blade from his belt as the second man staggered. He was inside the reach of the second man's arm before the arm could recover, and the blade went in twice below the ribs and once through the throat. The third came at his back. Alessandro drove his elbow into the man's temple, took the knife from the man's own hand, and put it into him under the sternum. 90 seconds. 3 of the deadliest men in Sicily on the floor. He wiped the blade on his sleeve and started up the staircase. Marco Bianchi was still on his knees behind the balustrade. His thigh had gone completely white below the wound. He fired the hunting rifle down the staircase at the shape climbing toward him. The first shot went wide of Alessandro's shoulder. The second cracked the marble at his feet. The third and the fourth did not touch him. Alessandro did not flinch. He did not raise a hand to shield his face. He climbed. Marco tried to work the bolt for a 5th round, and the shaking of his hands would not let him. Alessandro reached the top step. He kicked the rifle out of Marco's fingers so hard it slid across the stone and over the edge. He bent down and closed one hand around Marco's throat and lifted him. Still kneeling, up until his toes barely touched the floor. He held him there for a moment. "You destroyed a family," he said quietly. "You could betray me. I could have lived with that. But you shot her in front of her daughter." Marco's mouth worked. Nothing came out. Alessandro drew a second pistol from the small of his back and pressed the muzzle against the meat of Marco's outer thigh, just below the earlier wound. He pulled the trigger. Marco screamed. He moved the pistol to Marco's other leg and fired again. He moved it to Marco's left hand, still weakly clutching at his wrist, and fired a 3rd round through the palm. He set the muzzle against the soft place low on Marco's abdomen and pulled the trigger a 4th time. He did not do it fast. He did not do it for information. He did it the way Sophia had been shot, piece by piece, because he needed the man to feel what a body feels when it is dying by inches on a stone floor. Then he leaned in close, so that his mouth was almost against Marco's ear, and he said very softly, "Emma will grow up. Sophia will heal, and your name will be forgotten in this house before the winter." He straightened. He set the muzzle of the pistol against the center of Marco Bianchi's forehead. He pulled the trigger one last time. Marco fell backward against the balustrade and slid down it and did not move again. Around them, the great hall had gone quiet in the way a battlefield goes quiet when only one side is still standing. The Romano defenders were broken. What remained of them was running or dying. Enzo's men were sweeping room by room through the lower floors. Somewhere on the roof, a fire had begun to spread across old wooden beams. Alessandro turned his head. Luciano Romano stood alone on the balcony with his back against the wall. Alessandro started walking toward him. Alessandro climbed the second staircase to the third floor without hurrying. Every step he took, the fortress grew quieter around him, because there were fewer men left to make noise. Luciano Romano had already understood that the balcony was a dead end. He had slipped inside the door of his private study, thrown the heavy lock, and moved to the panel behind his desk that opened onto the small stone corridor of the family escape tunnel, the one he had built into the mountain 3 decades earlier and had never yet needed. He got as far as the far end of it before he saw Enzo waiting in the darkness at the exit with 2 men and a rifle. Luciano turned and walked back the way he had come. By the time he was in his study again, Alessandro Moretti was kicking in the door. The lock tore out of the frame on the second impact. The heavy oak swung open. Alessandro walked in with a pistol in one hand and blood on the other, and Luciano was standing at his open wall safe with a leather portfolio of documents half pulled from the top shelf. Alessandro crossed the room in 4 steps and put him against the wall. The old man was smaller in person than he had been on the balcony. His silver hair had come loose. His hands, when Alessandro pinned them at his sides, were trembling in a way 60 years of survival had not prepared him to hide. 20 years you waited for this night, Alessandro said. His voice was very quiet. I gave you many chances to keep breathing on the same island as me. I never touched your ports. I never touched your family. I let you keep your name. You chose to put a knife into my back. You chose to put a hand on the woman I love. Luciano's mouth moved. Alessandro, please, listen to me. I will give you everything. Every account. Every ledger. Every man I have left. You take the West. You take Catania. You take my house. Just please, it is too late for that. Alessandro raised the pistol between them, set the muzzle against the center of Luciano Romano's forehead, and pulled the trigger once. The old man's body slid down the wall. 60 years of the Romano bloodline in Sicily ended against the plaster of his own study. Alessandro let go of his shoulder and stepped back and did not look at him again. Outside the door, along the corridors of the compound, and down through the great hall, the 30 men of the Moretti raid moved from room to room, with the discipline of soldiers finishing a job. What remained of the Romano forces, some 40 men in various states of injury and surrender, was either killed or taken. The armory in the eastern wing was rigged and burned. The office vault on the second floor was emptied of its ledgers and its cash and its 4 hard drives. The account numbers pinned to the map on Luciano's wall were photographed. Then the map was torn down and burned. The Romano properties in Catania, Siracusa, and Messina, whose addresses had been extracted from the study's file drawers, were assigned to teams already moving on the mainland by radio. In 4 hours, from a burning stone castle on the western slope of an active volcano, the entire Romano organization, 6 decades of blood and territory and money, ceased to exist as a working entity in Sicily. Alessandro walked back down through the compound as the first pale gray of dawn began to appear in the shattered windows. He crossed the great hall without stopping. He walked past the fires still burning along the far wall, past the bodies of men whose names he had not learned and would not learn now. Smoke rose in slow columns from the wooden beams. The air smelled of gunpowder and old stone. He did not feel any of it. He did not feel anything. There was only one thought in his head, and the thought was Sophia. The radio at his collar clicked. Signore, Rocco's voice, breathing hard. She is on the helicopter. We are airborne. Bleeding is severe, but she is alive. Dr. Rossi is prepped at Palermo. 15 minutes to landing. Alessandro closed his eyes for 1 full second. Understood. He walked toward the base of the front stairs. Enzo was there, kneeling on the stone with Emma in his arms. She was crying into the fabric of his jacket, small and shaking, calling for her mother in a voice that had begun to lose its shape. Alessandro dropped to one knee beside them and took her into his own arms. Uncle is here, Principessa. Uncle is here. Mama is going to be all right. I promise you. I promise you. She turned her face into his shoulder and did not let go. He carried her out through the shattered front doors of the fortress and across the courtyard to the second helicopter waiting on the flat stretch of black lava beyond the gate. The rotors were already turning. He climbed in with her still in his arms and did not set her down. The helicopter lifted off the mountain and turned north toward Palermo, and in the seat beside them, Alessandro finally allowed himself to hope that he was not too late. The first helicopter set Sophia down on the roof of the Rossi Clinic in Palermo at 3:58 in the morning. The second helicopter, with Alessandro and Emma, touched down 20 minutes behind it. In those 20 minutes, Alessandro sat with the small girl pressed against his chest and did not speak. Emma had cried until she could not cry any more, and now she lay in his arms, breathing in small, shuddering intervals. He kept one hand flat against her back. Below them, the coast of Sicily slid by black and gray, with the first thin line of dawn beginning behind the mountains. He looked out at that line for a long time. For 15 years he had believed the empire was the point, the territory, the accounts, the men who called him signor. He looked at all of it now, and it had no weight at all. If Sophia did not open her eyes again, none of it would ever have meaning. The helicopter set down. He carried Emma into the private surgical wing on the 4th floor, where 8 of the finest doctors in Italy had been standing by since his radio call had reached the clinic. Sophia was already in the operating theater. The bullet from Marco's second shot had lodged near her heart. She had lost a great deal of blood. Alessandro sat down in the corridor outside the double doors with Emma across his lap and did not move. The surgery took 7 hours. A nurse came out to offer him fresh clothes. He shook his head. His shirt was still stiff with Sophia's blood along the front and the sleeve. He would not let them touch it. Emma slept for the first 2 hours. When she woke, she looked up at him without speaking for almost a full minute before she said it. "Uncle, Mama is not going to die, is she?" He held her tighter. "I will not let her leave us, Principessa. I promise you." At 10:30, Dr. Rossi stepped through the double doors and pulled his mask down. "The bullet grazed the aorta, signore. We removed it. We repaired the vessel. She is alive, but the next 72 hours will decide everything." Alessandro closed his eyes. They moved her to the intensive care wing. Alessandro sat down in the chair beside her bed and took her hand between both of his, and he did not leave her side. When Enzo came the next morning with contracts, he signed them with his free hand. When Capos flew in from Naples to confirm the outcome of the Etna operation, they came to a hospital room. He did not stop holding her hand. In the small waiting area, Emma drew a picture of a house with a red roof, 3 people in front of it, and a yellow sun above. She carried it into the ICU on the 2nd morning and laid it, very carefully, on her mother's chest. "Mama, get better fast. Me and Uncle are waiting for you." On the 3rd day, at 7:20 in the morning, Sophia opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was Alessandro, asleep in the chair beside her bed, with his hand still folded around hers. His beard had come in dark along his jaw. The front of his shirt was stiff, with dried brown blood, and the shirt was the same one he had worn into the fortress. He had not changed it in 3 days. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she moved her fingers, very slightly, against his palm. He was awake at once. By the end of the first week, she could speak in short, quiet sentences. She smiled the first time Emma climbed onto the bed beside her. By the end of the 2nd week, she could sit up and eat by herself. By the end of the 3rd week, she was walking short lengths of the corridor on his arm, one small step at a time. Alessandro moved his life into the clinic. Every meeting, every decision, took place in the small waiting room across the hall or in a chair pulled up beside her bed. He slept in that chair. He shaved in the visitor's bathroom. He would not have gone home if the villa had burned to the ground. One afternoon, in the quiet hour after Emma had fallen asleep against her mother's side, Sophia looked at him. Late light lay across the bed cover. "Why did I do it?" she said softly. "I didn't even think. I don't even understand myself." Alessandro lifted her hand and pressed it against his mouth. "Because you felt what I have been feeling. 7 years, Sophia. I have been waiting 7 years." 1 month later, Sophia came home. The gate of the Moretti estate opened for her the way it opened for the family, because that was what she had become. The cypress drive was lined with staff standing quiet in the afternoon light. Not one of them had been at the villa the day she was dragged down the marble staircase. Alessandro had let every single one of the old household go in the weeks she had been in the hospital, and had rebuilt his house from the ground up. Everything about the villa had changed. No one now held absolute authority over any part of the operation. Every decision of consequence passed through 3 separate points of verification before it was carried out, including his own. Nothing moved through one man's hand alone, and nothing could. The old escape tunnel from his father's time had been sealed with reinforced concrete. Every camera line in the private wing had been rebuilt on independent servers. Every keycard had been reissued. The perimeter had been redesigned by a team of former military engineers Alessandro had flown in from Genoa. Sophia was announced, on the first morning of her return, as the official head of the entire household. Every account, every schedule, every hire, every dismissal, now passed through her office. She was given a real title, real signing authority, and the quiet, absolute protection of the man who had once been too afraid to name what he felt. Alessandro came home more. 2 of his lawyers had been startled to learn that he expected to be reached at the villa now, not on planes. He had understood, standing in the corridor of a Palermo clinic with a small girl asleep on his shoulder, that an empire without the people you love inside it was not an empire. It was only weight. On the first evening she was home, he took her into his study. He drew a small velvet box from the drawer of his desk. He opened it. Inside sat the second silver ring, the narrow wolf's head he had ordered 3 months earlier from the workshop in Florence, with the words inscribed inside the band. Ti aspetterò per sempre. I will not ask you the usual question, Sophia, he said quietly. I only want to say this. Let me be a family with you and with Emma. That is all I am asking. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, and the tears came without shame, and she nodded once. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit exactly. That evening, at sunset, the 3 of them went up to the roof terrace above the west wing. The Mediterranean lay flat and gold below them. The sky over Sicily had turned the color of old copper. Alessandro lifted Emma onto his shoulders. Sophia stood beside him, with her hand around his arm, and the silver ring warm on her finger. The 3 of them looked out toward the sea. Emma leaned down and wrapped both her small arms around Alessandro's neck. She was smiling. Uncle, she said softly, this time Mama won't have to cry anymore, right? Alessandro nodded. Once, and turned his face to look at Sophia, and his eyes were very gentle. No, Principessa. Not this time, not ever again. The sun set on the Moretti villa, and the last light on the water was the color of a home that finally had a family inside it. Alessandro Moretti understood, then, that the innocent phone call of a 4-year-old girl had done more than save one mother's life. It had exposed a traitor who had been hidden for 20 years. It had stopped the takeover of a rival family that had waited 60 years for its chance. And it had changed, forever, the way he would lead the empire he had inherited. From blind trust into careful watching, from distance into presence, from a man too busy to look into a man who came home. That trust without watching is not kindness, it is negligence. And the cost of that negligence can be the life of the person you love most in the world. That Sophia learned what it means to speak the truth when no one in the room believes you, and to keep speaking it, because the truth is never wasted. And that a 4-year-old girl taught every grown-up in that house that when the person you love is hurting, you do not wait for a grown-up to fix it. Sometimes you only have to pick up the phone and tell the truth. Dear friends, if you were in Sophia's place, would you have thrown yourself in front of a bullet for the person you love? If you were Alessandro, would you have believed the words of a 4-year-old child over the man who had served you for 20 years? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice, your reflection, and your feelings mean everything to this channel, and we read every single one. If this story touched your heart the way it touched us while writing it, please do us the small kindness of leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and sharing this video with someone who needs to hear a story about truth, courage, and second chances. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing these stories to you every single day. From all of us here, we wish you good health, peace in your home, and warmth in your heart, today and every day. Take care of the people you love, believe them when they speak, and when a small hand reaches for you, do not be too busy to hold it. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you again in the next video.